more on what we can expect on this gathering. We welcome back Abdullahi Halakhe, joins us now, an African security and policy analyst. Good to see you again. This event has been, I don't want to say the word hiatus, but it hasn't happened in 8 years, and now it is happening, and I kind of have my own theories as to why, but tell us why the timing and why now.
No, thank you, Phil. It's great to be back here again. I think in terms of the reasons why it didn't happen, in the previous administration, they did not have an Africa policy at all. So some of the statements, some of the concerns, some of the focus of the previous administration was purely far removed from, the interests of the African continent. So as a result, it wasn't a priority for this administration. 2 years into the administration, they set out the Africa strategy. Previous administration did not have that. So this is a chance. But in reality, I think, like with many, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to dig into it, I think the challenge is for the Western countries, they look at Africa as a continent, as a problem to be solved, whereas other actors look at Africa as an opportunity. Secondly, every time Africa is looked at from the Western media and policy perspective, it is looked at in relation to A, what does Africa got to do with Russia? B, what has Africa got to do with, let's say, China? So there isn't an opportunity to look at Africa as Africa. And the strange thing is, particularly for the United States, they do have a model that works, that looks at Africa as a potential solution, that looks at Africa not in relation to China or Russia. For instance, PEPFAR did tremendous amount of work in terms of, disrupting the HIV trajectory, but it's not sexy and it can't be sold in this town unless you use China or Russia.
Well, okay, so for those who follow the space very closely, there's no question that China has spent a significant amount of resources over the past decade or more in building strong relations with the African continent. And some have criticized the U.S., saying that they should or could have done more during the same time period. So for lack of a better word, there's some catching up to do, if you will. But as you pointed out, it is two very different strategies, right? Because the United States sees Africa, I don't want to say just as problem solving, but there are opportunities, and I hear about that in the business community. Tell me what the U.S. is doing right in this relationship and what they're doing wrong.
I think, let's step back. I think the word that you used was a bit of catching up. For the last 20 years, China has had, Africa-China Summit. And over the last 20 years, while China was building infrastructure, roads, football stadiums, and all that, what was the United States building? The United States was opening new military bases, forward operating bases. If you take what the United States has as military bases and what China has built in terms of roads, large-scale infrastructure, you will see that there is tremendous level of divergence. So that is what the United States catching up that it has to do. That is what I meant when I say that it looks at the continent as a problem to be solved, conflict and all that. Let's not forget, the United States does tremendous amount of good work, particularly around humanitarian aid. For instance, in the Horn of Africa, that's Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia, close to 40 million people are in need of humanitarian aid. The United States has given tremendous amount of money in support of that. For the Somalia's response now, the United States has given almost $1 billion. The United States supported the UNICEF to a tune of 75% of their needs for the regional response. So there's some aspect of Africa relationship that the United States does extremely well. The challenge really is when in policy and when in the media framing, it is framed as a zero-sum game where China gains, the United States loses. It shouldn't be like that. United States, if China does the hardware, the United States can do software, and there is room for everybody. Africa is not a country. It is a continent of over 50 countries, and there is a chance.
The meetings will, be extended all the way to the weekend. So it's nearly a full week of meetings and relationship building with 50 different countries in Africa. And this is a pretty big deal. We are not too far from where the convention center is, and I can see that the streets and security has been stepped up significantly. And I've never seen this before. I mean, if there's ever a time they were doing 200%, this is it. And I think now, if that's said, then expectations have to go up, right? There has to be something positive that comes out of this really, really big red carpet rollout that the United States is doing. What are your expectations, or what are the expectations of African countries of what they hope to achieve by the end of this week?
All the whispers that we are hearing is there isn't going to be a major package that will be announced. Obama had the Africa, power, where, millions of people are connected to the power grid. They identified, electric power as a gap. Previous President George Bush identified, HIV, AIDS, and health, largely including malaria and tuberculosis, as a big problem that needed to be solved. I think this administration has not found that. But what would happen is that there'll be a great deal of the United States, particularly its private sector, tech and digital space. There'll be a lot of a lot of deals would be signed with many African countries, because this is seen as a space where the United States has leverage, has a leg up than many other countries. But I think what I would want to say is that the mere fact that this meeting is happening 8 years after the last one, that shows that the United States is serious. This is coming on the back of the United States in August launching its sub-Saharan Africa strategy. There isn't a great deal of it. There's a lot of good words that are put to on paper. But now the real test, where rubber meets the ground, is the implementation and putting the money where their mouth is.
Very quickly, President Biden has 2 more years left in this presidency. What do you think Biden's expectations are from this summit? Because they must have a plan in place.
I think pushing back largely, not even China, pushing back against Russia in light of serious food insecurity problem on the continent, and the fact that a country like Somalia import 90% of its grains from Russia and Ukraine, that would be a huge diplomatic coup. But the head of African Union, Senegalese president, said that we will not accept to be forced in a position where we have to choose either or. We'll deal with people who have African interest at heart.
Yeah, that's an awfully important relationship. I'm glad you brought that up. Abdullahi Halakhe, I really appreciate your insight on this. Appreciate it very much.